Imagine an ordinary man, almost invisible in the frenetic pace of everyday life. He worked in a simple workshop, surrounded by the smell of grease and the metallic sound of tools. No one would ever imagine that he would be the protagonist of such an extraordinary story, a story about how small gestures can change lives forever. It all started with something almost imperceptible, notes hidden in the glove compartment of an elderly lady who visited his workshop regularly. Simple phrases written in haste, but filled with a silent kindness. He never knew the real impact of these words until the day a lawyer showed up with a letter that would change everything. This is the story of Clara and the mechanic who never knew how much he meant to her. It is a story of overcoming gratitude and how the deepest love can be born from the most discreet gestures. And do you know what makes it all even more incredible? The legacy they left together. Stay until the end, because this journey will touch your heart in ways you can't even imagine. Are you ready? It was a gray morning when she first pulled into that modest garage. The rusty sign swayed gently in the wind, as if trying to draw attention to itself. The elderly woman got out of the car slowly, adjusting the scarf around her neck. There was something about her movements, maybe the slight hesitation in her walk, or the careful way she held her keys that told a story before any words were spoken. He was there, standing by the door, wiping his hands on an old grease rag. He wasn't much of a talker. He preferred to observe. And that was when he noticed her eyes, brown, almost opaque, but still carrying traces of an old strength. She looked like someone who had weathered many storms and survived, though some scars remained visible. "Good morning," she said softly, handing him the keys. He nodded briefly, responding with a polite murmur. It was always like that. Few words exchanged, an air of polite formality. Even so, there was something about her that stuck in his memory, like an old melody that insisted on echoing. In the following days, she came back a few more times. Always at the same time, always in the same car. He began to notice details, the way she looked out the window while she waited, lost in thought, or that peculiar way she crossed her arms, as if seeking protection from the internal cold that no one else could see. It was then that he realized she was not just an occasional customer. She was someone who needed more than mechanical repairs. But what could he do? He was not a man of grand gestures or speeches. So he began to think of small, almost imperceptible ways to show her that she was not alone. Maybe it was just a passing idea. Or maybe it was the beginning of something much bigger than he could ever imagine. As the weeks went by, he began to notice things that had previously escaped him. Small things, like the way she hesitated before getting out of the car, as if the world outside was a little heavier than she could bear. Or those moments when she would sit on the workshop bench, leafing through an old magazine without really seeing the pages. He didn't need to be a psychologist to understand that there was something beyond that firm and controlled posture. One day, while he was adjusting the engine of his car, he heard a deep sigh coming from outside. When he looked out the dirty window of the workshop, he saw her standing next to the vehicle, her arms crossed over her chest, staring at the horizon. Her trembling hands held a crumpled white handkerchief, and for a brief moment, he thought He saw her shoulders sway, as if carrying an invisible burden. But when she caught his gaze, she quickly straightened her posture and forced a barely perceptible smile that had affected him in a way he hadn't expected. It wasn't just her age or her frail appearance. It was something deeper, something he recognized. Even if he didn't want to admit it, he knew what it was like to feel alone, even surrounded by people. And there, in this woman who barely spoke to him, he saw a reflection of that. A silent echo of pain and resilience, but what to do? He wasn't one for words, never had been. His entire life revolved around tools, engines, and practical problems. Still, something inside him kept insisting, what if he could help? What if there was a way to reach her without invading her space? This idea began to grow inside him, small at first, but gaining strength with each visit she made, until one day, while organizing his tools on the workbench, he had a simple, almost naive idea, an idea that might seem insignificant to anyone else, but that, for him, carried enormous weight. It was something that would require courage, not the courage to face great challenges, but the courage to let go of his own shyness and try to touch another human soul. That night was different for him. As he put away his tools and turned off the lights in the workshop, his mind kept spinning around the idea that had come to him earlier. He knew he couldn't just talk to her. He wasn't the type to articulate feelings in words. But maybe he could write something small, almost imperceptible, but full of meaning. He sat at the old desk in the garage office, pulling out a yellowed piece of paper he found in a drawer. He picked up a pen that had already been uncapped and hesitated for a few seconds. What to say? How to touch someone's heart without sounding invasive or overly sentimental. Finally, his hands began to move slowly, as if afraid of making a mistake. "You are stronger than you think," he wrote, his handwriting firm but simple. He didn't sign it. He didn't need to. The next morning, while she was waiting for her car, he carefully placed the note in the glove compartment, hidden among the papers and receipts. It was a quick, almost furtive gesture, but his heart was beating fast, as if he had just accomplished something monumental. When he handed her the keys, he said nothing. He just smiled slightly, and she nodded in thanks. He wondered if she would even open the glove compartment. A few days later, he noticed something curious. She came back for another checkup, and this time there was something different about her. A barely perceptible gleam in her eyes, as if something inside her had been touched. He wanted to ask, wanted to know if she had found the note, but he didn't dare. It was their secret now, or maybe it wasn't. Maybe she hadn't even noticed. But then, as she walked out of the garage, he saw a detail that confirmed everything. As she got into the car, she opened the glove compartment, looked inside, and closed it quickly with a smooth movement of her hands. There was no smile, no comment, but he knew. He knew that she had read it, and that it had touched something deep inside her. Now, he knew there was no going back. That note was just the beginning. A silent bridge had been built between them, and he felt he had to keep crossing it, even though he didn't know where it would lead. Over time, the notes became a kind of secret ritual. He wrote them at night after the workshop closed, when the silence was almost absolute and the only Witnesses were the tools hanging on the walls and the creaking of the floorboards beneath his feet. Each message was carefully thought out, as if he were choosing the right words for an invisible friend. He knew he couldn't be too obvious, but he also wanted them to be sincere. Sometimes they were simple sentences. You have a light inside. You that inspires those around you. Other times they were deeper reflections full of faith and hope. Even in the darkest days, there is a promise of a better tomorrow. God always walks beside us, even when it seems we are alone. He never signed them, but each note carried something of his soul, something he himself may not have known he had. She never said anything. She never asked about them, never mentioned his name, or made any gesture that indicated she knew who was behind those words, but he saw them. He saw them in the small details. Once, he noticed her grip on the steering wheel tightening as she left the garage, as if she had been given new strength. Another time, she smiled softly as she opened the glove compartment, as if she were holding a precious secret. Asterisk, it began to change something inside him too. At first, it was just a gesture of compassion, a way to fill the void he felt when he saw her so distant and alone. But now, those messages became a reminder that we all need something or someone to remind us how important we are. Even when we think no one is looking, he kept writing, week after week, month after month. He didn't know how long he would do this, but something inside him told him it was necessary. As if those notes were more than just words on paper. They were a way of saying, you are not alone. They were a quiet echo of love and humanity in a noisy and often indifferent world. Asterisk. But there was something he didn't know yet. Something that would completely change everything he thought he understood about kindness, purpose, and human connection. Something that would only come to light years later, when it was too late to ask. Time has a peculiar way of passing through silent routines. To him, the days blended together in an almost indistinguishable sequence of oil changes, brake adjustments, and brief conversations with customers. But there was something different about her. Even as the months turned into years, each visit from her was marked by a new layer of fragility, as if life were slowly draining her of her life force. One morning, he noticed that she seemed more fragile than ever. Her walk was slower, and the hands that handed her the keys were visibly shaking. She still had that polite smile, but now there was a shadow in her eyes, a deep sadness that could not be disguised. He wanted to ask, wanted to say something, but the words stuck in his throat. It wasn't his place after all. Or maybe it was, but he didn't know how to cross that invisible line. That night, as he wrote the next note, he felt compelled to go beyond the light, encouraging messages. He picked up his pen and poured out everything he felt on paper. I know you're struggling with something big. I don't know what it is, but I know you're stronger than any challenge. God never gives us more trials than we can handle, and you've shown the world what true courage is. It was the most personal note he'd ever written, and he hesitated before putting it in the glove compartment. It felt too intimate, too vulnerable, but something inside him told him it was necessary. Over the next few months, he began to notice subtle changes. She came to the shop less often, and when she did, she seemed even more tired. One day, He noticed that she was wearing a scarf over her head, covering what had once been her well-groomed gray hair. Still, she kept reading the notes. He could tell by the sparkle in her eyes when she opened the glove compartment, even though she tried to hide it. He knew something very serious was going on, but he had no idea what it was. And the uncertainty gnawed at him inside. I wanted to help. I wanted to do more, but all I could offer were those handwritten words. Until one day, she simply stopped showing up. No explanation, no warning. Just the emptiness left by her absence, and then, weeks later, a piece of news reached him. A piece of news that made his heart ache and brought out all the emotions he had kept bottled up for all those years. It was one ordinary afternoon, while he was adjusting a rusty engine, that the sound of firm footsteps caught his attention. He looked up and saw a man dressed in an impeccable suit standing at the door of the workshop. There was something formal and heavy in the air, as if this visitor carried with him a secret that could not be contained in words alone. The man introduced himself as a lawyer and asked for a few minutes of his time. I came here on behalf of a client, the lawyer said, his voice calm but with a weight that seemed to echo off the walls of the workshop. He frowned, trying to remember who it could be, but then the name escaped the man's lips, Mrs. Clara. His heart stopped for a moment. Her. It was about her daughter. The lawyer explained that Clara had died weeks before, after a long battle with cancer. He had suspected it, but hearing those words was like being punched in the gut. And then came the revelation. Clara had left clear instructions for a special letter to be delivered just to him, just to the mechanic from the small garage. With trembling hands, he opened the envelope. Inside, he found a letter written in careful handwriting, almost childlike in its simplicity. The first few lines made him catch his breath. Dear friend, I don't know your name, but I know how much your kindness has helped me keep fighting through the hardest days. Each word was like an arrow hitting straight into his heart. She knew. She had always known. She had written about the notes. She said that each message had been a ray of light amid the darkness of her illness, proof that someone still saw her strength when she herself thought she no longer had the strength to carry. And you never knew, the letter continued, but your words were my shield in the moments when I thought I would give up. They reminded me that I was not alone. But what really took his breath away was the last part of the letter. Clara revealed that she had left him something very special, the house where she had grown up, full of memories and stories, an inheritance that represented everything she felt for that silent gesture of love. He folded the letter slowly, trying to process everything he had read. His hands were shaking not only from surprise, but from the weight of the emotions that were now flooding him. How could something so simple, words written on pieces of paper, mean so much? And now, faced with this revelation, he realized that his life would never be the same again. He spent hours sitting in the old chair in the workshop's office, holding that letter between his hands as if it were a fragile treasure. Each word echoed in his mind, repeating itself like a melody he could not silence. You never knew, she had written. And it was true. He never knew how much those notes had touched his life. He never knew that simple words, scribbled hastily on pieces of yellowed paper, could be the anchor that kept him steady during the darkest days. It was then that he began to mentally replay all the moments they had shared, even if from a distance. Her visits to the garage, the discreet glances they exchanged, the way she hid her face when she opened the glove compartment, now it all made sense. Those little pauses, those seconds of silence while she read the notes, these were moments of connection. Moments when he had, without realizing it, been an essential part of her fight against cancer. But what shook him the most was the inheritance. The house where Clara had grown up. It wasn't just a material gift. It was a symbol of everything she stood for. Strength, resilience, gratitude. It was as if she were saying, "Your kindness will not be forgotten. It deserves to be honored." He felt a lump in his throat as he thought about it. How had someone as simple as him managed to touch another person's life in such a profound way? That night, he couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling, thinking about all the times he had doubted himself, thinking that his actions didn't matter. How many more people could he have helped with kind words? How many lives could have been touched if he had had the courage to move beyond his shyness and fear of rejection? And then something inside him shifted. He realized that kindness doesn't have to be big or loud to be powerful. Sometimes the most profound impact comes from the most subtle things, a smile, a word of encouragement, a hidden note. And now, faced with this revelation, he knew he had a greater purpose ahead of him. A purpose that involved honoring Clara's legacy, but also continuing to spread what she had recognized in him, love in its simplest and purest forms. But how would he do that? How would he transform something so personal into something that could touch other lives? This question kept hammering at his mind, like a calling he could no longer ignore. In the days that followed the revelation of the letter, he began to see the world through different eyes. Everything seemed different now, more alive, more full of meaning. The garage, once just a place of work, became a space where stories happened, where lives intersected in ways he had never realized. And he himself was no longer the same man. He began to observe the people around him more closely. He noticed the tired expressions of the customers who brought their cars in for repairs. The heavy sighs hidden behind polite smiles. He began to notice that each person carried their own battle, invisible to the eyes of those who were not willing to see it. And then something inside him awakened, a new determination to be more present, to extend kindness even when it seemed unnecessary. He began to think about the house that Clara had left for him. He didn't want to use it just for himself, knowing the emotional weight it carried. That house had a story, a heart, and he felt he needed to share it with other people who also needed a safe haven. Maybe he could transform it into a space to help families in difficulty, or even into a shelter for people who, like Clara, faced challenges that seemed impossible to overcome. But the greatest impact was within himself. He realized that kindness is not something you do just to change the world. Often, it is something that changes those who practice it. The notes he wrote to Clara were an almost selfish gesture at first, a way to ease his own anguish at seeing her so alone. But now he understood that those small acts had transformed into something much bigger. They were proof that even the most discreet gestures can create ripples that touch lives deeply. That reflection brought him a peace he hadn't felt in years. It was as if he had finally found his place in the world, his reason for being. It wasn't something grand or extraordinary. It was simple, like everything he had ever done. But now he knew that simplicity doesn't mean insignificance. Sometimes what seems minor is actually what matters most. And as he thought about it, an idea began to take shape in his mind. An idea that could perpetuate Claire's legacy, but also amplify the impact of his own actions. An idea that would ensure that the story didn't end there, but would continue to inspire others. The decision wasn't made immediately, but when it came, it was with a clarity he had never felt before. Clara's house would not just be a reminder of the past. It would be a bridge to the future. He decided to transform it into a supportive space for people facing similar challenges as she did, a place where they could find comfort, encouragement, and most of all, the knowledge that they were not alone. With the help of friends and community, volunteers, he carefully renovated the house, preserving every detail that told Clara's story. The walls were painted warm colors, the bedrooms were adapted to accommodate families in need, and in the main room he installed a small bookshelf with books and messages of hope. On one wall, he hung a simple plaque with the words she had written in the last note he found. "You are stronger than you think." But he didn't stop there. Inspired by the quiet kindness that Clara had recognized in him, he began to encourage others to do the same. He created a local movement called Notes of Light, where volunteers would leave messages of encouragement in unexpected places inside books and libraries, on store counters, even on benches in public squares. It was as if Clara's spirit was alive in every gesture, touching hearts she would never get to know. He also began visiting hospitals and support centers, sharing Clara's story and the notes. He wasn't a great speaker, but his voice carried an authenticity that touched those who listened deeply. Often, at the end of his talks, someone would come up to him with tears in their eyes, saying, "I needed to hear that today." And each time that happened, he felt like he was fulfilling the purpose that Clara had planted in his heart. Today, years later, that house continues to be a beacon of hope for many people. And the notes, which began as a solitary act of compassion, became a movement that crossed borders. He learned that the true legacy of a life is not in what we accumulate, but in what we share, in the way we touch other hearts, even without knowing it. And as he looks out over the horizon, sitting on the porch of that house that now belongs to so many, he smiles. He knows that Clara is smiling too, wherever she is. Because the kindness she inspired is endless. It is an echo that continues to reverberate, touching lives and transforming worlds. This story reminds us that the greatest impacts often come from the smallest gestures. A hidden note, a kind word, a moment of silent presence can change the course of a life, maybe even save one. What about you? Have you ever stopped to think about the power of your own actions? If this story touched your heart, share it with someone special. Who knows, you might be planting a seed of hope exactly where it is needed most. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, which celebrate the strength of the human being and the transformative power of kindness. See you next time.